Cincinnati Zoo polar bear attack. On March 28, 1990, 25-year-old zookeeper Lori Stober was working her regular shift at the Cincinnati Zoo, tending to the polar bear exhibit she had cared for since she was hired 5 years earlier. The bears were kept behind steel bars, a barrier that had separated staff from the animals safely for years. That afternoon, Stober approached the enclosure, holding a grape, offering it to one of the zoo's 800-pound male polar bears, a bear named Icy. It should have been a routine moment, the kind zookeepers repeat dozens of times a day. Instead, the bear suddenly pushed his teeth through the bars and clamped down on her fingers. Stober tried to pull free. She couldn't. Icy kept pulling, dragging her arm further through the bars, with each passing second the bars themselves offering no real protection once her limb had crossed the threshold. The bear chewed through her arm almost to the elbow before finally biting it clean off. Releasing her only once there was nothing left to hold on to. Fellow staff members rushed to her side and applied a tourniquet on the spot, and action doctors later said saved her life. Without it, she likely would have bled to death before help arrived. Stober was rushed into emergency reconstructive surgery. She survived, though she would live the rest of her life without her right arm. In the aftermath, it emerged that Stober and other keepers had previously warned zoo management that the enclosure's bar spacing was dangerously wide warnings that had gone unaddressed before the attack. The zoo initially disputed her account, entirely claiming publicly that there's no way the bear could get his mouth or teeth through those bars, and fought her in court for 4 years. In 1994, a jury sided with Stober, awarding her a $3.5 million judgment. The case settled for an undisclosed amount the following year. It remains one of the most serious animal attacks in American zoo history, and a stark reminder that even a barrier trusted for years can fail in a single unguarded second. Stober herself remained remarkably composed in the days after the attack, telling reporters at a press conference just a week later that she felt no bitterness toward the bear, or even at the time, toward the zoo. Her optimism made headlines nearly as much as the attack itself. But the years that followed were harder than the interview suggested. Her marriage ended less than a year later, and colleagues said the trial, which dragged on for 4 years before settling, took a quiet emotional toll that never fully made the news. Dallas Zoo Gorilla Rampage. On March 18, 2004, at the Dallas Zoo, a 13-year-old, 300-pound western lowland gorilla named Jabari was inside his habitat in the award-winning Wilds of Africa exhibit, an enclosure surrounded by a 16-foot wall and a moat specifically designed to be impossible for a gorilla to clear. Some visiting teenagers had reportedly been teasing Jabari shortly before closing time. What happened next stunned even the zoo's own director. Jabari scaled, the wall cleared the moat, and simply walked out into the public grounds, something the enclosure's designers had believed was physically impossible. For the next 40 minutes, panic spread across the zoo as visitors ran for cover, some hiding inside a restaurant, others locking themselves inside the monorail. Jabari, agitated and disoriented, charged toward a mother named Cheryl Reichert and her 3 children. She threw her kids over a nearby fence for whatever protection it offered. But her 4-year-old son was trapped behind a tree, unable to move. The gorilla grabbed Reichert, slammed her against a wall, and bit her repeatedly in the same spot on her arm over and over in front of her screaming children. Moments later, Jabari found another family. He put a 3-year-old boy's head inside his mouth, slinging him around by it. When the boy's mother rushed to pull her son free, Jabari sank his fangs into her thigh and dangled her upside down by the leg. Zoo staff, armed only with pepper spray and tranquilizer darts, could never get a clear, safe shot at the animal as he moved through dense bamboo and trees. When Jabari finally charged at 2 Dallas police officers who had cornered him on a nature trail, they opened fire, killing him instantly. 4 people were left with lasting injuries, both physical and psychological. The victims later settled a lawsuit against the city for $500,000 total, the maximum allowed under Texas law. Investigators were never able to fully explain how an enclosure believed to be escape-proof for over a decade had failed in a single afternoon, though the zoo's director would later admit the facility had been financially struggling with staffing cut and maintenance postponed in the months before the attack. Years later, both mothers described lasting post-traumatic stress. One said she and her children still struggled with the sounds of screaming crowds at amusement parks, unable to separate the noise from the memory of that afternoon. San Francisco Zoo tiger attack. On December 25th, 2007, shortly after closing time at the San Francisco Zoo, a 300-pound Siberian tiger named Tatiana was inside her open-air grotto enclosure, a habitat protected by a moat and a wall that zoo records listed at 20 feet tall. It was not 20 feet tall. Investigators later measured the actual wall at just 12.5 feet, more than 7 feet shorter than what the zoo believed, and well below the height required by national safety standards for big cats. That evening, 3 young visitors, 17-year-old Carlos Souza Jr. and brothers Paul and Kulbir Dalwal, were reportedly seen taunting Tatiana, throwing sticks and pine cones into her enclosure, according to evidence collected at the scene. Somehow, using the shorter than recorded wall as leverage, Tatiana leapt from the bottom of the dry moat and pulled herself clean over the top, something no tiger had managed to do at that enclosure in more than 65 years of operation. She attacked immediately, killing Sousa right outside her pen. The Dalawal brothers fled roughly 300 yards to the zoo's cafe, only to find it locked. Trapped outside with a loose tiger, somewhere behind them, they screamed for help. An employee inside finally heard them and called 911, but the response was delayed twice. Over once because the cafe staff initially told dispatchers they suspected a mentally ill person was screaming, "Not an animal attack," and again because zoo security struggled to locate the tiger. When police finally found Tatiana, she was actively mauling one of the brothers. Officers ordered her to stop. When she turned toward them instead, 4 officers opened fire and killed her on the spot. It marked the first time in the Association of Zoos and Aquariums history, dating back to 1924, that a zoo visitor had been killed by an animal that had escaped its enclosure at a member zoo. The zoo was fined just $1,875 for the safety violations that let it happen. In the years after, evidence emerged suggesting police believed one of the young men may have dangled a leg or object over the enclosure's edge moments before the escape, though investigators were never able to conclusively prove provocation. What was certain and far harder to dispute was the wall's true height, a discrepancy between the zoo's own paperwork and physical reality that had gone unnoticed for over 6 decades until the one night it mattered most. Dickerson Park Zoo elephant attack. On October 11th, 2013, at the Dickerson Park Zoo in Springfield, Missouri, 62-year-old John Philip Bradford, the zoo's elephant manager with 30 years of experience on the job, was guiding a 41-year-old Asian elephant named Patience through a narrow chute connecting the elephant barn to the outdoor yard, a routine task he had performed thousands of times before. Patience had a known history. An accreditation report filed the previous year had explicitly documented that she and another elephant at the zoo have a history of aggression toward handlers, a warning that remained on file but hadn't changed daily operating procedure. That morning, inside the confined space of the chute, something set Patience off. She turned, and with a single motion of her 4-ton body, knocked Bradford backward into the chute wall. There was nowhere for him to go. She pressed forward, crushing him against the metal barrier with a force no human body could withstand. Even the shifting of body weight can cause injury or death. One zoo industry expert later explained describing an animal that size as lethal, even without any intent to harm. Bradford died from his injuries. In the aftermath, zoo officials made an unusual decision. Patients would not be disciplined, transferred, or euthanized. Officials described the death as tragic but consistent with the known documented risk of working in close proximity with elephants of her size and temperament animals that even under strict protected contact protocols can kill with a single unplanned movement. The incident renewed a long-running debate in the zoo industry over protected contact versus older, free contact handling methods, and how much daily risk should ever be considered acceptable when caring for an animal capable of exerting several tons of unpredictable force in an instant. Colleagues described Bradford as one of the most experienced elephant handlers in the country. Someone who had trained under the older hands-on tradition of elephant care for 3 decades, a tradition that had already been steadily phased out at most accredited American zoos in favor of barrier-based systems, precisely because of incidents like this one. Palm Beach Zoo tiger attack. On April 15th, 2016, veteran zookeeper Stacy Conweiser, 38, entered the night house of a 350-pound Malayan tiger named Hati at the Palm Beach Zoo, preparing the enclosure ahead of a scheduled Tiger Talk presentation for visitors. She unlocked 2 separate padlocks to access the tiger's holding area, a space where cameras had been turned off and which was not visible to the public. Unknown to her, a large box sitting inside the enclosure, one that did not appear anywhere on the zoo's own blueprints, was large enough to easily conceal a 350-pound tiger, and Hati was hidden behind it. The moment Conweiser stepped inside, Hati attacked. She managed to scream into her handheld radio before she was overpowered. Whether anyone heard that call in time remains disputed to this day between the medical examiner's report and the zoo's own account. A coworker rushed to the enclosure and found Hati standing directly over Conweiser's body in a pool of blood. Zoo staff made the decision to tranquilize the tiger rather than shoot him, a choice that would prove costly in the minutes that mattered most. Paramedics were unable to reach Conweiser for 17 minutes, forced to wait outside the enclosure until the sedative fully took effect before it was considered safe to enter. She died from a fractured spine and a lacerated jugular vein injuries. The autopsy confirmed came directly from the bites to her neck. She was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. Conweiser had reportedly just accepted a new job offer outside the zoo before her death. The facility had tried to convince her to stay. Her husband, who also worked at the zoo, resigned in the aftermath and never returned. The decision to tranquilize, rather than immediately neutralize the threat, became the center of intense public criticism, echoing questions that would resurface just 6 weeks later at a different zoo under very different circumstances. Records later showed the Palm Beach Zoo had faced at least 3 prior safety incidents in years before Conweiser's death, raising questions about a pattern of near misses that had never triggered a full redesign of the Tiger Complex's protocols. Even as staff privately raised concerns about visibility gaps, like the hidden box that ultimately cost a veteran keeper her life. Cincinnati Zoo Gorilla Incident. On May 28, 2016, at the Cincinnati Zoo's Gorilla World exhibit, a 3-year-old boy visiting with his family told his mother he wanted to go inside and meet the gorillas. Moments later, he climbed a 3-foot barrier fence, crawled through several feet of dense bushes, and fell 15 feet down into the shallow moat of the enclosure, landing directly inside the habitat of Harambe, a 17-year-old, 450-pound silverback western lowland gorilla. Zoo staff immediately signaled for the exhibit's gorillas to return indoors, a command the 2 female gorillas obeyed instantly. Harambe did not. Instead, he approached the child in the water, grabbed him, and began dragging him through the moat, at times violently, for what witnesses and responding firefighters described as 10 to 15 agonizing minutes, while the boy's mother screamed for help from above. Some witnesses would later argue the gorilla appeared at moments to be trying to shield or protect the boy rather than harm him. Primatologist Jane Goodall would eventually say the same after reviewing the footage. But zoo officials couldn't gamble on interpretation in real time. Tranquilizing a 450-pound gorilla takes several minutes to take effect, and an agitated, sedated silverback thrashing next to a trapped toddler was considered far too dangerous a risk. The zoo's dangerous animal response team made the call. A single shot killed Harambe almost instantly. The boy was pulled from the enclosure with non-life-threatening injuries and released from the hospital that same evening. What followed was one of the most viral, polarizing news stories in recent memory, drawing commentary from celebrities, a sitting presidential candidate, and animal behavior experts across the world, alongside a wave of internet memes that somehow outlived the outrage itself. A federal inspection afterward confirmed what many had suspected. The barrier the boy had gotten through did not meet required safety standards. It was the first time in the exhibit's history, dating back to 1978, that anyone had breached the enclosure at all. In the years since Harambe's death took on a strange second life, entirely disconnected from the tragedy itself, spawning internet memes, viral jokes, and even write-in votes in a U.S. presidential election. A bizarre cultural afterlife that many involved in the actual incident, including zoo staff and the boy's family, found deeply uncomfortable to watch unfold from the outside. Conservators Center lion attack. On December 30th, 2018, at the Conservators Center, a wildlife facility near Burlington, North Carolina, describing itself as a community zoo. 22-year-old Alexandra Black was 10 days into her very first out-of-state internship, working under the direct supervision of a professionally trained keeper as part of a small team cleaning a lion enclosure. It was her fourth animal-related internship. Friends and family described her as someone determined to build a lifelong career working with wildlife. The lion involved a male named Matai, had been secured inside a separate locked holding space, exactly as protocol required, while the cleaning team worked. Somehow, Matai got out anyway. Investigators later determined the cause a large rubber ball left inside the enclosure, as enrichment for the animals had rolled into position and physically prevented the gate to his holding space from closing all the way. Nobody on the cleaning team knew the gate hadn't sealed. Matai walked straight through the gap and into the space where Black and her colleagues were working. He killed her almost instantly. The sheriff's office later said, before staff had any real chance to react. Attempts to sedate him afterward failed entirely. Deputies were ultimately forced to shoot the lion 8 times before he went down just to safely recover Black's body from the enclosure. A federal inspection of the facility conducted only months before the attack had found no violations at all. The state labor department later fined the center just $3,000 for 3 serious safety violations, a number that did little to quiet the wider question. The case reopened nationally about how loosely regulated small private wildlife facilities remained compared to larger accredited zoos. Taigan Safari Park lion attack. On October 16, 2024, at the Taigan Safari Park in Crimea, one of Europe's largest breeding grounds for lions, home to roughly 60 of the animals, Chief Zookeeper Leocadia Perivalova entered an enclosure to clean it, a task she had performed countless times across nearly 17 years working at the park. The enclosure was divided into 2 connected rooms by an internal door, a simple bolt-lock barrier meant to let staff move lions into one side while safely cleaning the other. That morning, Perivalova went in to clean and did not secure the bolt behind her. 3 lions still on the other side of that door pushed through into the space where she was working. There was no one else nearby to hear what happened next. By the time colleagues arrived, it was already too late. There was nothing left for them to do but confirm what the enclosure told them on its own. The park's owner, who had run wildlife facilities since 1995 and faced hundreds of prior legal disputes over safety and animal welfare violations, publicly called it a tragic mistake and declined to have the lions involved put down, insisting the fault belonged entirely to a door left unbolted rather than to the animals themselves. A criminal investigation into negligence was opened, though authorities never fully resolved whether the ultimate responsibility lay with Perevalova's own oversight in her final task, or with a facility that questions later suggested had never built enough redundancy into its safety protocol to survive a single human moment of forgetfulness. Safari World lion attack. On September 10th, 2025, at Safari World in Bangkok, one of Asia's largest open-air zoos and a popular attraction offering paid lion feeding experiences to tourists, 58-year-old zoo supervisor Jian Rangkarasamy, a nearly 30-year veteran of the park's predator section, stepped out of his vehicle inside the lion enclosure during a routine feeding round. It was a clear violation of the park's own posted safety rules, which explicitly required staff and visitors alike to remain inside vehicles at all times in the open-air lion zone. A witness, a doctor visiting the park that day, later said Jian stood with his back turned to the pride for several minutes, something the witness described as immediately unsettling to watch. Slowly, one lion began to approach. It pounced from behind, dragging him to the ground in a single motion. Within moments, 4 or 5 more lions joined the attack. Tourists and nearby vehicles honked horns and shouted him, desperately trying to scare the animals off. But the mauling continued for roughly 15 minutes before colleagues could finally pull Jian's body away. An autopsy later found his neck had been broken and his windpipe torn early in the attack, most likely within the first few seconds, meaning he had been unable to call out for help for almost the entire ordeal. Some zoo veterinarians speculated the young, still developing lions, who reportedly knew Jian well from years of feeding them, may have begun the encounter as rough, exploratory play rather than a predatory attack, a distinction that made no difference at all once their combined size and instinct took over. The park called it the first fatal incident in more than 40 years of operation and shut its predator zone while regulators investigated damaged fencing, inadequate warning signage, and understaffing that inspectors said had gone unaddressed for far too long. Looking across all 9 of these incidents spanning 35 years and 4 different continents, a pattern emerges that has little to do with the animals themselves and everything to do with the gap between a barrier that looks safe and one that actually is. A wall recorded at the wrong height, a box that never appeared on any blueprint, a fence just low enough for a determined 3-year-old to climb. None of these animals were malfunctioning. They were simply doing exactly what a tiger, a gorilla, an elephant, or a polar bear will always do, given the smallest opening a human being left behind. It's the reason modern accredited zoos now measure success less by how impressive an enclosure looks to a visitor walking past, and more by how many independent inspections it survives when nobody is watching it all. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments below.